Troy and Rafa relate?
So Troy and Rafa are both really violent men, and I think part of the reason why they're being so violent all the time is because they internally feel someone weak, and they're just being extra violent to cover that up and to show their dominance.
Okay. I also think that has to do with money because Rafa in one of Juno's stories was like stealing from his mom and just like stealing her money from like under her bed. And then in Fences, Troy is always just talking about like how his sons have to pay him back like the $10, which like wouldn't seem like much to us, but like to them is a lot. So I think that has to another connection.
I think it's more because they're lost in their own realities of what they think life should be. So they think that by asserting their male dominance, that's the way they're supposed to be in this patriarchal world.
Okay. How do you guys think that Rose is similar to Mommy and Juno's writings?
Rose and Mommy they both live with like husbands who aren't that nice, I'd say, and both of them like have power, but they seem like they don't have power because they never use it.
Mm-hmm.
Like for example, like both Rose and Mommy like are really scared of their husbands, and that they're unable to like protect their sons from like their husband's violence.
Yeah, I agree. What about you, Medwin?
Well, I think they use although they have like little power, they have some power, and they use that in strategic ways. Like, Mommy in the Diaz short story kicked Rafa out because she did have power over her house. She had power over her son, and the son did respect her in a way. And in Fences, Rose didn't exactly like kick Troy out the house, but they don't talk anymore.
Right, like figuratively.
And Troy always has to give money to Rose so she can handle the house. So for some reason, even though they're not the most dominant, they do have some sort of power.
She also had like the power to take the child in.
Yeah.
Like she could have rejected it, and he like would have to do something else with the child, but she like decided to keep it.
Yeah, but when reading both stories, I always thought it was really sad that both women like constantly like have to like fear confronting their husbands, because it shouldn't be that way. Like they should like be like really comfortable and happy with their husbands, but like whenever they're talking to their husband, they like freeze, and I thought that was just really sad.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
So, what role does racism play in Gino Diaz's writings and Fences?
Oh, I think like not as much of racism, but like race in the stories, like they give like more background culture, and like it just like gives you a better idea of how like their lifestyle is different than like what we might imagine our own lifestyles being. But like in the first line or like first couple of scenes in Fences, there's obviously racism that occurs throughout it, but I don't think that's like a major part of it. Rather, just like it's to show like the background and culture of this play.
Yeah, and I feel like race plays as a small role in creating like the source of problems, because like for example, because of race, what was his name? Troy wasn't able to like accomplish his dreams, and that is why he's forbidding his son to do it.
That's true.
And that creates a big problem in the family.
I feel like race relates to a bigger concept, which is like a power struggle. So like race like plays this role that white men are more powerful than black men or Hispanic men. So in this struggle, these men and like women are like struggling to be equal to and trying to be equal to like their white superiors. Like they have their own problems trying to be like more superior.
Yeah, I agree. Along those lines, how do you think that men are portrayed versus women in any of the stories?
Well, they're always more powerful because the world we live in is a patriarchal world where men have more opportunities than women. So,
yeah. They also usually tend to be more violent. I think that kind of correlates.
So what's the significance of jail in Thoreau's life and Troy's life in MLK?
Well, I think jail serves as like a place of solitary confinement, which it is, and it allows them to like reflect on themselves. And for Thoreau, that's where he like realized his like big idea on resistance to government and like one of his like founding things. And like for MLK, that was his famous letter from Birmingham jail. And for Troy, that's like his time where he like kind of reflected. And then after that, he also like learned baseball, which was like his pride now, like that's his like best thing he's best at. And then after that he met Rose and kind of changed him more. So it's like there's steps of like changing themselves and transcending in a sort of way.
Like although it's a punishment, it also helps people like discover things about themselves. And so like I don't see it, well, it is a punishment, but like you can discover things about yourself that you never knew and find like your inner self.
Right, there's definitely games.
Yeah, just like in transcendentalism.
Yes.
So moving on, why do you think the men are so violent?
I think it just has to do with that, like it's their way to assert their dominance. I feel like it would be very different if in the stories the men didn't assert violence on the women or their children. I feel like they would be viewed as weaker in our mind, not necessarily if they were actually weaker, but I think it's like a way that the writers portray them as having more power.
And since like these men that we see in these stories are not powerful in society, they're at least trying to like gain their dominance in their households.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
I think it's something that like men learn throughout their lives because this world, even though they say like you shouldn't fight, has accepted violence in movies and shows. It's like all a boy's life they've grown up to like accept violence for what it is, and I think they think it's okay for them to use violence in that way.
Yeah, I actually really agree with that statement too. How do the main characters in the film Into the Wild contrast the characters in Fences or in Diaz's writings?
Well, the character in the Wild, he went out and had his own self-discoveries, while the characters in Fences and Diaz, they stayed with the community, but they were going crazy because they didn't go out and try to like discover themselves, and like they didn't take time to like think about
And reflect.
Yeah, and reflect on it.
So, why do you think infidelity occurred in the book and play? I feel like it's like both men in both stories like cheat on their wives.
Mm-hmm.
They always have like mistresses, and I think part of that is their way of like showing their unsatisfaction with their lives, because like they're not like they wouldn't be considered like successful in any way. So maybe, and they both seem like they have a really hard time like living in the household, so they just like go out and like it's like how they breathe.
I think it's like, it's gonna sound wrong, sort of like discovery, trying to find like new happiness. Because like Troy in Fences, he loves Rose, he will always take care of Rose, but he says that there's like this other like happiness he finds in his mistress. So I think these men, like they feel responsible to maintain their relationship with their wives and take care of their sons and children, but also want something more.
Yeah.
Because living that life is like just taking care of your kids, going to work, and coming home to your wife. It's like boring. So they want something new.
Yeah, that's a good point. What role does male privilege play in Diaz's short series and Fences?
In Diaz's stories, the sons never had to clean or cook. The mother did everything for them. And Fences, Rose doesn't work, and the only people who could really find work were the men. So I think like in the world that men just find it like easier to just live in general.
Yeah, I also think that if like the story was flipped and Rose was the one that cheated on Troy, it would be a very different story, and she wouldn't be allowed to like keep the child in the same house as Troy. Like I feel like she would be kicked out more. while like Rose, because she's a, you know, like when Troy had the baby and the kid, like he's allowed in because he's a male. I feel like that also kind of plays a part, but I don't know if that's necessarily true.
Yeah, so you think the authors are criticizing men more? It's like showing that women are like more powerful and smarter and stronger.
They're not necessarily criticizing the men, but I think what they're trying to do is show like how helpless their situations were. Like,
I also think they're like trying to illuminate like certain aspects of each. How like women, they are like portrayed as weak, but they can be strong. And men, like also kind of like the reverse, like men always seem like very strong and put together, but they obviously need something else in life too, because they tend to go off and like cheat, or they like yearn for something else too. So I feel like they're not always complete and like as put together as we would imagine them to be.
Well, I thought it had something to do with that men will always need women. Like man without woman is like nothing. So I thought that was like the core message that both